And welcome back to Community Focus. We're glad you could join us here today. We've got Don Parrish here with us now. Don's been an author, and Don's got several titles. I mean, there's several titles like historian, businessman, and a veteran, but then that's what we're going to talk about a little bit today. A little bit of the combination of both veteran and businessman and author. So first of all, welcome to our show today.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
And I know I just finished a few months back reading one of the books you had written in conjunction with Dr. Harry Spalding about Nelson County and serving in the Vietnam War. And I guess that's what it piqued my interest. Is we got a lot of veterans here in this area that some we know about, some we don't know about. Some obviously don't tell their story much, but you did tell their story.
Yeah, actually, Harry is one who started that, putting that book together. Mm-hmm. And he went around and visited with everybody in Nelson County he could come up with that had spent a tour of duty in Vietnam. Mm-hmm. And he did the lion's share of the work on that one. He put an incredible amount of time into interviewing all these people and pulling some stories from people who didn't particularly want to talk about it. Yeah. But he got it anyway and was able to jot all this down. And then I pretty much rewrote to what I thought was a satisfactory standard for writing a book and that. And then he asked me to write the center section on the National Guard unit that was in Vietnam in '68 and '69. I was, of course, a member of that.
Right. We'll get into that in just a second, but I know one of the things that hit me in the book that and I'm thinking it's more common with veterans than people think, is a lot of people don't like to tell their story. And I know you've told me yourself that you get a little emotional at times talking about it. And I remember there was one person in the book that had been interviewed and just refused to talk and said, I went through the hell before, I'm not going through it again. So I think that's more common than, but is it good to talk about it? Is it, in just your opinion, is it good to talk about it, or is it good just to put that part of history in your past and say, I've been through it, I'm not going to bring it up again?
Well, personally, I think it's better to talk about it. I talk about it to my family and other people. I've been interviewed countless times on TV stations around the world. I mean, German television, Britain, France. I mean, just and a number of others. But personally, I find it somewhat healing. Of course, I made a return trip back in 1995, and I found that to be somewhat healing. But it's when you've been involved in a combat situation, and I heard a World War II veteran say this last year, when you've been through that kind of experience and where your life is on the line, you don't ever get rid of that information. It's constantly with you. I think about it a dozen times a day. Yeah, and it just will not go away.
Well, for somebody who wants to do research on it, obviously your book, if you look on Google, The Battle of Tomahawk Hill, but Nelson County had I guess still to this day, the largest per capita casualties for the whole the United States of America.
That's my understanding, that Nelson County had the highest per capita loss in the Vietnam War of any community in the United States.
And this was primarily the call up of the local National Guard unit. The local National Guard unit was called up in support, but when you get there, it's not necessarily support anymore. It's basically when you get into the action, the word support doesn't mean anything anymore.
That's exactly right. Well, of course, our mission was to fire artillery in support of the 101st Airborne Division, and we did our job, and we did it extraordinarily well, and we were recognized in Vietnam by the 101st as being the first people they wanted to call.
Now, I know, going back looking at your book, but the enemy, we'll say, the Vietnamese at the time, was this a targeted mission for them for your particular battle, or is this something that just happened? I mean, do you know that did they ever determine exactly what their mission was?
Their mission was to get rid of our unit because we brought an enormous amount of damage to the North Vietnamese Army in South Vietnam, and in fact. There was one person captured that night, and he was made to talk by somebody, I have no idea who, that yes, we had practiced, and he pointed out exactly where the practice was back in the mountains, and later on it had been verified that yes, indeed, they were there. They had recreated our battery position on Firebase Tomahawk. And in addition to that, Firebase Tomahawk had a terrible history of of death and destruction before we ever got there.
Yeah.
It was an impossible place to defend. It was in a saddle with high ground on three sides of you, and you cannot defend yourself in a situation like that. As it turns out, when our battery was attacked, and we had 10 of our battery were killed. 5 of them were guardsmen, and the other 5 were regular Army people that had moved in. But when that happened, they closed that fire base and then went to the top of the hill and opened a new one. And I was speaking to a fellow last year who was at that location, and there was an effort to attack them, but they were able to thwart that effort because they were occupying the high ground. It's an age-old dogma that they have no business trying to change. If you're going to fire from a high point, you need the highest point in the area.
Yeah, anybody that's studied any military history at all knows that that's always been the case, and so we don't want to put any blame on anybody, but sometimes there is blame to go around, and sometimes somebody puts you in the wrong spot for the wrong reasons. And I mean, I don't know if you've ever went over this in your mind or not,
yeah, absolutely.
to think about why you were there.
Well, I wondered it before we ever moved there in the first place, and a lot of other people did too. Of course, that came from someplace other than our battalion,
right.
The 2nd of the 138th Field Artillery. We were part of the 23rd Corps Artillery in Vietnam, and they're the ones that placed us there. And it was a mistake, and I'll say that to anybody who wants to ask the question. And in addition to that, General Hal Moore from Bardstown made 7 trips back to Vietnam. And on his last trip, he and I communicated a whole lot. And on his last trip, he went to Firebase Tomahawk, and then he came back and talked to me about it. He said whoever decided to put a battery there was absolutely nuts. He had no business at all putting anybody there.
Well, you get a lot of it. I hate to put it this way, but you get some leadership, and I know this is in your book even. Some leadership there. One of the missions that Pat Simpson was going to go on, that he missed the flight because there were too many people on the helicopter, was shot down and killed. And fortunately, Pat wasn't on that helicopter. But again, bad decisions and get you in bad situations.
Absolutely. That particular day, it was extraordinarily foggy, and nobody had any business flying a helicopter. But our battalion commander. Our battery commander determined he was going to go out and call in fire from us. And here I am, chief of the Fire Direction Center, so he's calling in to us, and then all of a sudden there was no more communication, And but later on, a fellow by the name of Gary Linderer from southern Missouri headed up a squad that went into that area and found the bodies several days later. But he's one actually he wrote a book about all that.
Yeah. There's several books out there, and obviously Colonel Moore, General Moore now. I mean, there's a movie about his. Oh, yeah. And I got the honor to meet General Moore just a few years ago. So
right.
It's an interesting gentleman to talk to. But we've got a rich history in Nelson County, and I'll mention not only in Vietnam, but going back to World War II and probably World War I. I haven't done that much research, but I know there's a lot of history of veterans serving still right here in this area.
That's exactly right. And of course, World War I veterans are gone now, but the World War II veterans, there's still a bunch of them around. My uncle just passed away 2 weeks ago, actually on New Year's Eve, at the age of 99 years, 11 months, and 3 days. And he was a veteran from World War II, and he served his entire time in the intelligence in India. And had some fascinating stories.
My dad got out of basic training about 2 weeks before the victory in Europe, and he tells the story that Hitler heard that he was coming, so he gave up. So I don't know. I talked to Earl Johnson several years ago, and Earl was a POW in World War II.
Right.
And one of the stories he told me, I thought it sent chills down my spine. He said when he was captured, he was in Italy, and said he was hiding behind a rock, and he looked up and had a German soldier with a rifle in his face, and said, "For you, Yankee, this war is over." And he said, "I didn't know exactly what he meant." He didn't know if he was going to get shot or taken to a POW camp, but he went to a POW camp. Interesting stories he had.
Absolutely.
But again, in Vietnam, going back to Vietnam, is there's a lot. Obviously, the rich history is here today, and there's some people that have talked about it a lot. Some people don't, but it's. I don't know. I guess it's kind of hard to talk about the Vietnam War sometime because the veterans from that era is a little different from the veterans in the World War II era. I mean, it's a whole different type of war.
Well, if you think back to it with history and you start looking at numbers, you will find that casualties are becoming fewer as we advance in time. 58,000 soldiers were killed in Vietnam, or American service people were killed in Vietnam. And now as you go into other wars since then, you'll find that there are fewer and fewer people dying because technology has improved. I'm not so sure whether what the correctness or lack thereof may be with some of these wars. I do have my own opinion, but
I've got a son, he's a major in the Air Force, and he works with the drones. And that's one of the things. They send in drones, no people, but they have missiles.
Oh yeah, and I'm all about that.
They can do a lot of damage, and obviously there's nobody going to get killed on our side because of technology, but at some point, the enemy's going to have drones too.
Oh yeah, I don't doubt it. My big concern right now is that the enemy at some point may find out how to interrupt the GPS system that we so much depend on now for artillery, for airplanes. I mean, everybody is making use of GPS. Yeah. If they can cripple that system where it's no longer usable for whatever reason, I think our forces are going to be in a world of trouble.
Well, just like every other business you see out there, whether you go to Walmart or anywhere else, everything's based on computers now. And I don't know if we're getting away from like I said, the military in World War II, Vietnam, even today, the technology is changing so rapidly that the military doesn't look the same today as it did 30 years ago.
That's exactly right.
So again, I know Vietnam was a tough situation, and if we fought that war today, it would look much different.
Indeed, no question about it. But you stop to think that somewhere, but they don't really know for sure, but there's somewhere between 3 and 5 million Vietnamese died during that conflict.
Well, the thing about Vietnam too is we were playing on their home turf.
Oh yes.
I mean, they knew the terrain. They knew the place inside out. We were at a big disadvantage just simply going in.
No
not
question.
only for the Vietnamese regulars, but the Viet Cong as well.
Sure. Yeah, here we are, a foreign force on somebody else's soil, and they're going to defend it at all costs, and it cost them dearly, but they defended it and are happy because of it. But the other thing that was difficult for us to work with, when you compare to World War II, soldiers went from America into World War II and they stayed until the job was finished. Yeah. In Vietnam, we were there for 1 year. And the idea was you're going to get yourself out of there safe and sound in 1 year. Yeah. And that came first and winning came second. And I think it's a natural phenomenon. There's nothing you can do about it.
He's in the platooning system before Calipari.
Right.
You're going in to survive and get out.
That's exactly right. The number one thing was to be able to survive. But in World War II, the idea was you had to get the job done or you weren't going to get home.
Yeah.
And I think that's a mistake that we've made, is that we suddenly have made it a little bit too easy on people, and we're requiring them now to go for a given period of time, then you can come home. And I think it's just a natural instinct that you're going to protect yourself so you can get out of there.
Well, I think we made several, and I'll get into my own editorializing every now and then, but I think we made war too easy on the home front. And what I mean by that is during World War II, I wasn't living at that time, but obviously you hear about the rationing and different things that goes. There were sacrifices to be made right here in America. Right now we go to war, nobody here is sacrificing at all. If you don't have a family member or a friend or neighbor or somebody in the war, in many cases you don't even know what's going on unless you happen to be watching the national news at
That's
night.
exactly right.
And it's just become too sanitized.
It has. It's become very...
War has to be ugly. To me, war has to be an ugly horror that you want to avoid at all costs, not something you're going to look at as a first response.
That's exactly correct. With the Sniper movie that's out right now, they're getting a lot of criticism from people that think that, well, being a sniper is a coward's way to be involved in a war. Wrong. People who say undoubtedly never were involved in a war in the first place. And then secondly, the snipers protect the interests of the other infantry that are there. If it wasn't for snipers, on our side, snipers on the other side will kill a lot of people that otherwise have survived.
Well, if you've never, and I say don't say this lightly, but if you've never been in a situation where you've seen somebody killed, you can never fully understand what it means.
That's exactly right.
That you can't explain that to anybody else, and nobody will ever.
It's out of the question.
And again, you know, so a lot of people, they bottle that up and don't talk about it. I've heard many veterans over the years, their families will say they've been in the war, but they never talk about it. They never say anything about it. You know, it's they keep it bottled in the rest of their life. And for almost every veteran in this situation, I'm going to put this almost everyone suffers from some form of PTSD when they come home.
I think you're right. I think you're exactly correct on that. And of course, PTSD is something you hear a lot about now, but
You didn't know what it was 20 years
didn't
right.
have an idea of what it was, but
Yeah.
you know, 20 odd years ago.
Well, again, if somebody wants to get a copy of your book, which I think was a tremendous book, and it tells a lot about veterans from Nelson County, how do they go about getting a copy? And,
Well, I happen to own a bookstore.
yeah.
And now we're in the process of closing the store, but I certainly have copies of that book, and we'll continue to have them after we've closed the store. So
Uh-huh.
I'm happy to provide them
And
to
I'm
anybody
sure
who has an
you-
interest in them.
Telling the story, if anybody wants to come in and talk, you know, we will
Oh, yeah.
tell them to relay.
Absolutely.
Because it's history. And as I said, we don't want to forget our history. And we talk all the time about history, what went on in the American Revolution, what went on in the Civil War. But we got history right here at home. We've got bona fide military heroes. We've got bona fide military veterans that have seen some things that most people have only seen in movies.
That's exactly right.
And it's not something you glorify, but at the same time, we don't want to forget it.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's something you don't want to forget because you don't want to repeat it.
Exactly, exactly. Well, first of all, thank you for your service in Vietnam, but again, thank you for writing the book to keep this the memory alive of a lot of the people that we lost in that area, and some that came home. We want to remember them as well, and thank you for being here today.
Absolutely. It's my pleasure.
All right, well, thanks a lot. Don
Thank you, sir.
Parrish, from veteran, author, historian, several things, but Don is one of our treasurers here in Nelson County, and we appreciate him being here today. So thank you for tuning in, and we'll be back with more community focus here on Central Kentucky TV Channel 6, here on your Channel 6 radio television station. This is Kenny Fogle saying so long. Take care, everybody.